Hi. Before I get started today sharing with you the family recipe for baked beans, I want to let you know this is not a USDA tested recipe. Very few recipes that most of us can are actually tested by the USDA because testing is expensive. That said, I do a couple of things here to follow the science and make my recipes safe. One of them is I have a data logger which records temperature. And I was able to record the temperature on these beans, and they come to that 240-degree mark for a full 20 minutes in a pint-sized jar. That's important to know because when people are concerned, they're concerned about the botulism, and the botulism spores are, though everywhere, the toxin is relatively rare. But the toxin grows in environments that are high in moisture and low in oxygen, which canned food is once you get done. That said, I'm going to show you this just so that you have a comfort level. And for those that are only the approved method people that can, then this recipe isn't for you. But I feel really comfortable that between the high sugar environment, botulism is not supported in a sugar environment, and I will have a link below to show you that. And between the testing that I did with this in terms of temperature, I feel really confident with this recipe. So that's my disclosure up front. I hope you watch the whole video. I've got a great little hack, so to speak, at the end of the video. So watch it. Love these beans personally. I hope you do too. So I hope you watch the whole video, and thank you for tuning in. Here's the data logger chart that I downloaded this morning after making the baked beans yesterday. So along the one side is the temperature, and along the other side is the time. And if I take this video, you'll see that we had plenty of time above that 240-degree temperature mark. And in fact, the times that it was above the 240 were from 8:44 p.m. to 9:04 p.m., which is a full 20 minutes. So I'm comfortable that the toxin, botulism toxin, if it would even be in these beans, is not there. Hi, I'm Beth, creator of dryitcanit.com. I like to share with you recipes that I've created with canned foods or dehydrated foods, as well as show you how-tos for canning and for dehydrating. Today, I want to share with you a family recipe for baked beans. And these baked beans are going to be canned, and I'm going to give you a couple of different ways to do them. So, super simple recipe, really delicious. Definitely these beans are a little bit more on the sweeter side. So if you don't like a sweet bean, you might want to pull back a little bit on the sugar as we move through on this. But I think you should try this recipe because it's delicious. So what I start with is 2 pounds of northern beans. Now, northern beans and navy beans are similar. I use northern beans. I prefer the northern bean. And the difference between a northern bean and a navy bean is this. The northern bean is a little bit larger, and the navy bean is a little bit smaller, and it also has a more intense bean flavor. Honestly, I've never done it with the navy beans. I prefer the northern beans. I just think that the texture and everything works really well with this recipe. So to start with, you want to prepare your beans. There's 2 methods you can use for this. The method I chose to use was the overnight soak method. So what I did is I put these beans, 2 pounds, in a strainer. I rinsed them really well. I covered them with cold water, and I let them sit overnight. In my case, they sat for 13 hours. But you want at least 12 hours. I think anywhere from 12 to 15 hours is fine. You can put them in before you go to work, and put them in before you go to bed. Then I want to, after that, drain that water, rinse the beans really well. You don't want to use the water that your beans have soaked in. The other method that I also use frequently, especially during the summer, is to put the beans in an Instant Pot, bring them to a boil, and let them boil for about 10 minutes. Then what I do is I cover the Instant Pot, I shut off the Instant Pot, I cover it, and I let the beans sit for 45 minutes. And that works really well. The last thing you can do, of course, is you can put your beans in a pot of water, bring them to a boil, let them boil for 10 minutes, take the pot off the stove, cover them, and again, let them sit for 45 minutes. I find if you do it that way, you're best to let them sit for an hour, simply because the Instant Pot tends to have a little bit of pressure, so it kind of softens the beans a little bit more. But these beans, after they soak, while you might be able to put your fingernail into them, they're not really going to break, and they're certainly not going to be edible. So prepare your beans whichever way is easier for you. I've done them in the Instant Pot and had great success. I soak them and I have great success. It's whatever works for you. So I've got my beans, they've soaked, they've come in completely rinsed. To that, I'm just going to add a few simple ingredients. So I'm going to add a pound of chopped bacon. Now the interesting thing about bacon these days is that if you buy it in a package like I did this time, the packages tend not to be a pound anymore. This package was actually 12 ounces of bacon, and it works really well, and I find that more and more we're seeing our package sizes get smaller and our prices go up, right? But really what you're looking for here are two things with your bacon. Number one, it's got plenty of fat in it, so it's going to give you flavor, and then of course it's got a little bit of meat in it. But anywhere from 12 ounces to 16 ounces of bacon is good. Just make sure that you chop it really fine. The best way to do that actually is to make sure that your bacon is really cold when you slice it. I just take my bacon and lay it out the long way and then cut it accordingly. If your bacon is partially frozen, just partially frozen, it chops really, really easily. On a hot summer day, you probably want to use this method because it's harder to cut that bacon. All right, next thing you're going to do is you're going to add some onions. Now, the family original recipe called for 1 large onion. What's a large onion, right? Everybody has something different. Use 3 small, use 2 medium. But what you're going for is somewhere between 1.5 and 2 cups of chopped onion. And as you add your ingredients, you're just going to want to give it a little bit of a stir because you really want to get these mixed up well. So the next thing is the sugar. Brown sugar, of course. And that not only is going to give color to your beans, but it's going to give sweetness to the beans. Now, our family recipe calls for 2.5 cups of brown sugar. I have a 1/2 cup measuring cup, so it's going to look like I'm putting more in, but I'm not. And remember, anytime you're using brown sugar, you want to pack it into your measuring cup and push it down. So in other words, it shouldn't be loose, it should be packed tight. And that is important. And you know it's packed tight when you empty it and it holds its shape. So that's really an important thing. And by the way, did you know that you could make your own brown sugar? I didn't this time. But to do that, you basically just take sugar and you take molasses and you mix those two things up and you have brown sugar. It's less expensive to do it that way than it is to buy it. And I intend to make some up this winter again. During the summer, quite frankly, things have been busy, and so I've purchased my brown sugar, and then I was able to get some on sale, so then I purchased some more. And I actually store my packages of brown sugar, once they're open, in Mylar bags. And these Mylar bags are great. I take the bag, I fold it up with a rubber band, I put it into a Mylar bag, and it really keeps the brown sugar soft and moist, regardless of how long in between that I use it. So that's kind of a nice little trick that if you have a problem with your brown sugar getting hard or don't use it often. All right, so I have 2.5 cups of brown sugar here. And you can see you're going to need a pretty big mixing bowl. Obviously, you can half this recipe, you can double this recipe, you can do whatever you want with it that way. And what I want to do is I just want to break up this brown sugar a little bit, because it's going to be easier to get everything stirred up if I don't have the big clumps of brown sugar. So I'm just going to mix this in and mix this up a little bit before I add the rest of my ingredients. Now, I remember these baked beans, I don't know the origin of this recipe, but I had an aunt who always had these, and we always looked forward to having her baked beans. I remember family reunions, and everybody was like, oh, is she gonna make her beans? Because they're just that good. So this is really a fun recipe, and like I said, really, really easy. So I have this mixed up a little bit, not real well, but it's mixed up some. To this, I'm going to add some dry mustard. I'm going to add 1 teaspoon of that. And actually I have my 1/2 teaspoon out, so I'm just gonna add 2 of the 1/2 teaspoons, which probably are going to fit in here a little bit better anyway. So 1 teaspoon of dry mustard. I've done these without the mustard when I haven't had any. Don't. Put the mustard in. It just kind of gives it that little extra tang. Then I'm going to add some salt and pepper. Now I find equal amounts of salt and pepper work really well. I like 1.5 teaspoons. I'm using a 1/2 teaspoon measuring again. So I'm going to add 3 of those to get to my 1.5 teaspoon. So 1.5 teaspoons of salt and 1.5 teaspoons of pepper. Make sure that you use ground pepper on this. So your pepper should be fairly fine. Sometimes I will add as much as 2 teaspoons of the pepper. Don't skimp on the pepper. Don't skimp on it. The pepper adds a nice balance to the sweetness, and I find that that really is an essential component of these particular beans. So what else have I got here? Oh, this is occasionally what I will do is I'll also add a little bit of molasses. The original family recipe doesn't call for that, but I find that I kind of like a little bit of molasses in here. I think it gives it a little bit more color and just a little bit more depth of flavor. I'm only adding a tablespoon of that. Molasses is one of those things that are really sticky to work with. So, you know, the molasses is absolutely optional. I have great results either way with the beans. And now your job is to really get these mixed up well. You want to get your salt, your pepper, your mustard, your brown sugar, get everything really incorporated well. From here, there's really a couple different ways you can go again. And I'm going to talk about both of those because there's pros and cons to both, and yet they both give me a delicious bean. So one way to do these is to do these in the Instant Pot. I'm not talking about canning them in the Instant Pot. I'm talking about cooking them in the Instant Pot. Big difference. So don't think that you're going to put your jars in the Instant Pot and then that your food is canned, unless you have the kind of Instant Pot that that does can food. So basically what you have here is you have all of your ingredients mixed really, really well. So I need to get some water, and I will be back in just a moment. I'm back, and I have my water, and I'll explain that in a moment. There's 2 ways you can proceed from here, and I've done both and have been just about equally happy with both. If you have an Instant Pot, and again, I'm not talking about a canner, I'm talking about an Instant Pot, a cooker, not a canner. You can now take this whole pot of beans, dump that into your Instant Pot, and then what you want to do is add enough water to just barely cover the beans. So in other words, you're going to have a few beans maybe popping out of the surface, but you're going to put them in the Instant Pot. You're going to put your Instant Pot on high. You're going to let it cook for 45 to 50 minutes, and then you're going to let your Instant Pot rest for 10 minutes. In other words, as it decompresses. If you want to let it rest all the way, that's fine also. But 45 minutes in the Instant Pot, the whole thing. We're not talking about canning at this point. We're talking about cooking the beans. That works really well. I've been really happy with that. The main difference between this and the way I'm going to do it today is that the bean color is going to be a little bit lighter. It's going to be like a lighter brown instead of a darker brown. And the beans are going to be just a bit more firm than if I do it the way I'm going to do it today. Both methods work. Both methods give you a delicious bean. And of course, we still have the canning process after we prepare the beans, however we decide to do it. I'm going to do mine today in such a way that I'm going to use my oven for a few hours. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of my beans and I'm going to add them to a pot. And hopefully I'm not going to get too many of them on the cupboard here. Like so. And again, I have all of this really well mixed, and it's a little wet on the bottom simply because the beans, after they got rinsed, are going to hold a little bit of water in between. But you want to get all those ingredients, all that bacon and brown sugar and all those spices out. Spilled just a few here. And then once you get them into the pot, give them a good stir again just to make sure that they're all mixed. And you should do that whether you're going to do these in the Instant Pot now or whether you're going to do them in the oven. So what I did is I put my beans in. I'm going to kind of smooth them out so that they're fairly level, I guess is the word that I am looking for. Have a little bit of that good juice here. I still want to get that in there. These beans, I tell you, They're so good. They're really hard to not eat. So I have my beans in here. They're basically leveled off. Now, what I want to do is I want to add enough liquid to just barely cover the surface here. So I'm just using water, and go a little bit slow on this because all of this water can all of a sudden come up and be where you want it to be. So I can see at the end right here that I'm where I want to be right now. And so if I look, and I'm not going to be able to turn this over, I guess, I have liquid that I can easily see, but I also have maybe a layer of beans, not quite a layer of beans, up on top. I'm going to add just a little bit more water. And then I want to just smooth this out, just so that it's as even as it can be. Now what I'm going to do, and the reason I'm going to do this in the oven today is because the beans are going to be just a tad softer after I'm done canning them, and they're going to have a richer, darker brown color. And I really like that in my baked beans. So what I'm going to do is you want to cover this loosely now with foil, or what I do is I use my cover, but just put it a little bit off kilter here so that the steam just barely escapes. I'm going to put these in the oven at 250 degrees. And anywhere from 8 to 12 hours is what you want for this. That's a long time, but you're slow cooking these, the flavors are infusing, and it's really, really good. It's worth this extra step if you have the time. So these are going into the oven. They're going to be there for a while, and when these are done, I'm going to come back. I'm going to show you what they look like. Then we'll get them put into a jar, whether you're using the Instant Pot or whether you're using the oven method, and I will show you how I get these canned and let you know what the time is to cook these in the canner, to get them pressure canned. So stay tuned, don't miss the next part. These beans have been baking in the oven and now have a really nice dark brown color, which is what I was going for, but they're ready to be canned. These beans were baking in the oven at 250 degrees for 7 hours. They're actually edible at this point, but perhaps a little bit more firm than I would like to have finished, and they will soften a little bit more as we pressure can them. If you wanted to cook these all the way and freeze them, you absolutely could do that. Put them in the oven for 12 hours. And again, remember to keep the jar just slightly ajarred, not the jar ajar, the cover ajar, just slightly, or if you're covering it with foil loosely. Every 3 or 4 hours, check and make sure that your moisture is just barely covering those beans, because otherwise the top will dry out on those. And then give them a stir during that 3 or 4 hour period. So let's start canning up the beans. My pressure canner has heated up my jars, so I'm going to start canning these. So I'm doing pints today. You can do these in pints or you can do these in quarts. So I'm starting with hot jars and I'm starting with hot product. So I'm going to fill each one of my jars, and I want to do these to 1 inch headspace because the beans still could expand a little bit. And you're just going to want to use some kind of a spoon here where you can get some of the juice as well as some of the beans. Get those in there, and I need just a few more to get to that 1 inch head mark. And give those a little bit of a shake. Now, debubbling is something that's difficult to do in here, but I think it's still important to do, and I forgot to grab a wooden spoon to do so, so bear with me for just a second. All right, as I look at these, I know that I need just a little bit more, a few more beans in there. So I'm going to take my what do you want to call that, funnel out of the jars, and I'm just going to take a wooden spoon and I'm going to gently go around the edges of the rim just to remove any extra air bubbles. So this step is important then. You need to clean the rim of your jar. This is one place where I really strongly recommend that you use vinegar. You've got a lot of sugar in these beans and you have a lot of fat with the bacon. And sugar and fat are two of the things that can cause a failed seal for you. So make sure that you wipe the rims of your jars really well. If you choose to use water, that's fine. You might want to do it a couple of times, but just make sure that those are really clean. Then take your lids, and again, today's lids don't necessarily have to be sterilized or hot ahead of time. Check the back of your box because the new lids have a change in the compound, and I think some people are having failures either because they're heating these lids ahead of time, which is destroying some of that compound, or they're over tightening their lids. So you're going to put the lid on like so. You're going to put the screw band on, and again, just finger tight and then into the jar. So let's do another one. One trick that I have that I sometimes forget to mention is when you have your little jar of vinegar here, a really good trick is when you're all done filling your jars and you have them in the canner, dump the rest of the vinegar into your water in your canner. What that does is keep the scaling from the water off of your jars. Works really well. So again, we're just going to fill these. We have hot jars with beans and with juice on them. We're going to fill these to the 1 inch mark. And just as a reminder, the 1 inch mark is typically this bottom, this is too hot to hold here. Let me hold. It's this bottom ridge right here. So we have our beans in here. We want to debubble these. And as I look at that, after I do that, I'm actually needing just a few more beans in here. Headspace is important for a couple of reasons. Number one, you want to get as much as you reasonably can in the jar, but also when you're pressure canning, you're really expelling the air. And if you have too much headspace, you might have a problem expelling all of the air that you really need to do so to get these properly sealed. So again, I'm just taking a wooden spoon. You can use a straw, but a straw might introduce air, but basically try and use something non-metallic. Take your wet rag, or preferably your vinegar rag, wipe the edges of your lid of the jar, or the top of your jar really, really well, the rim. And again, because you're working with fat here and you're working with sugar, it has the potential to to be sticky and cause failure in your sealing. So make sure these are really dry. Take your lid, center it on your jar, take your screw band, and again, just finger tight and back into the canner. So I'm going to finish putting all of my jars into the canner. Because I have meat in these, I'm going to pressure can these pints for 75 minutes. That's going to work for most of you if you're between basically 1,000 and 2,000 feet in elevation. Check the directions on your canner, adjust for your elevation. If you're canning quarts of beans, and this works fine for quarts, then you should do 90 minutes. If you're using the 12-ounce jars, that's bigger than a pint, also go 90 minutes. If you're using a half-pint jar, then use the 75 minutes. So again, if it's a pint or less, 75 minutes. If it's bigger than a pint, you want to use 90 minutes. So I'm going to fill these jars up. I'm going to pressure can these, and then I'm going to be back when these are completely canned and cooled, and I'll have one more thing to share with you. So I hope you watch till the end. In the meantime, see that subscribe button below? I sure would appreciate if you'd hit that button and subscribe. You'll get notified when I post videos, which is usually Monday, sometime Thursday. If you're interested in that video, you can watch it. If you're not, then you know you didn't miss anything, but hitting the subscribe button I sure would appreciate. So stay tuned for the last segment on this. So super happy with these beans. This is a great pantry item and a great side dish. I do want to remind you to always check your lids to make sure they've sealed. To do that, you want to push on the top of the lid and make sure there has no give. This one did not seal. In fact, I think it's the one that might have siphoned a little bit because I can see everything up towards the top. But listen, see, this lid, when I push down, gives. That's a sign of it not sealing. This one will go into the freezer. These beans freeze beautifully. This is not a problem. You'll also notice that they have some fat on them, and that's from the bacon. Don't know if you can see that for sure. Don't worry about that going rancid. It's not going to happen. These beans are a great recipe. You can probably use your favorite recipe, your favorite family recipe too, and have just as much success following the guidelines. But I honestly could eat a whole jar of these beans. They're sweet. The texture on them is perfect. They are not at all mushy. Now, the one little tip. When I started out, I told you you could cook these in the Instant Pot. Not can them, but you could cook them in the Instant Pot. When you do that, the beans will be a lighter brown color. They're just as delicious, but the flavor isn't quite as deep as when you put it into the oven. And this might be more information than you want to know. For whatever reason, if you have a problem with gas when you eat baked beans, the Instant Pot seems to take care of that. So what can I say? Anyway, I appreciate your watching. A thumbs up would really be appreciated. It helps more subscribers find my channel, and that sends me to do more videos. Hit the subscribe button below if you haven't done so. In the meantime, again, thanks for watching and happy canning.